Look at the clock. It is 3 a.m. You are awake but not present. You are standing in the hallway of your own mind, watching a phantom in the mirror. You are trying to move, but your feet are nailed to the floorboards of a decade-old failure. The scene, the argument, the humiliation, the missed chance is not being recalled. It is being reenacted within the four walls of your skull. Your body is rigid. Your heart rate spikes. You feel the cold sweep of shame as if the event is happening right now, in this room, under this clinical light. The conscious mind, the naive ego, whispers its tired rationalization, its stress. A little more rest, a new routine, and this loop will break. This is the defensive lie the ego tells itself to maintain the fragile illusion of sovereignty. It insists that you are merely tired, that this is a temporary malfunction of the machinery. But the truth is far more structural, far more clinical. This is not fatigue. This is not a memory. This is a state of profound psychic dissociation. A complex, a constellation of emotionally charged ideas has seized the controls of your emotional apparatus. It is acting as an autonomous personality, compelling you to relive its specific tragic drama. You are not remembering a past event. You are experiencing possession by the shadow. The unconscious is forcing you to watch a play written entirely by the aspects of yourself you have refused to integrate. We must ask why this highly complex biological machine, the human brain, dedicates such immense energy to reconstructing a reality that has already dissolved. Why do we willingly torment ourselves with ghosts? Most popular psychologies will tell you this is unresolved trauma, a debt to be paid. They are wrong. You are not the victim of your memories. You are, psychically speaking, a willing prisoner. And the reason you cannot escape is that deep down, the primitive, instinctual layer of your being prefers the hell it knows to the terrifying uncertainty of freedom. The psyche, fundamentally, does not prioritize happiness, peace, or fulfillment. It prioritizes homeostasis, a predictable, known quantity. To the ancient core of your being, the most dangerous element in the world is the unknown. The future, where you are confident, where you take risks, where you shed the old identity, is seen as the abyss. It is a void lacking data, a terrain where the ego structure might dissolve entirely. Therefore, the brain prioritizes certainty. And here's the paradox we must confront. The past, no matter how painful, no matter how traumatic, is certain. You survived it. You are here. Therefore, to your primitive instinct, the past is safe. Even if it was miserable, even if it broke you, the fact that you are breathing means that the strategy of living through that pain worked. When you attempt to step into a new psychological identity, one free from the weight of failure, your brain panics. It sees the void, it screams, abort. And to protect you from the terrifying uncertainty of the future, it retreats instantly into the known certainty of the past. It replays the old trauma, not to hurt you, but to anchor you. It is saying, stay here. We know the layout of this prison. We know where the walls are. We know how to survive the pain here. Do not go outside. This mechanism is why individuals remain chained to destructive relationships, why they stay in occupations that crush the spirit, and why they endlessly replay their failures. You are making a calculated, instinctual choice, a familiar hell over an unfamiliar, unpredictable freedom. Your brain is a prediction engine. Its primary function is to minimize anxiety by accurately guessing the next moment. If you step into a radically new self, it cannot predict the outcome. This causes intolerable psychic tension. To lower the anxiety, it forces you to hallucinate the past onto the present. It overlays the face of the critical parent onto your current superior. It overlays the rejection of the anima onto a new partner. It turns the current moment into a simulation built from the debris of the past so that the system can feel stable. You are not truly living in the present year. You are living in a simulation constructed from the psychic ruins of 10 years ago. Recognize this sensation when the pull toward rumination occurs. It is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you are profoundly terrified. You are terrified of who you would be without that pain. If you let go of the betrayal, if you stop being the failure who messed up that opportunity, the ego is faced with a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and nothing terrifies the established ego more than the necessity of new creation. Here is the second, more subtle lock on the cage. You believe you are remembering truth. You are not. Memory is not a passive video recording. It is not a hard drive where you retrieve files exactly as they were stored. Memory is a creative act. It is a reconstruction. Every time you recall a memory, you are not taking it off the shelf. You are rebuilding it from scratch. You are the architect of ruins, and every time you access the blueprint, you make an adjustment. Neuroscience confirms that every time a memory is accessed, you alter it. You inject your current mood, your current complexes, and your current bias into the scene. If you are depressed today, you will inevitably rewrite your history to look darker. If you are insecure, you will edit that conversation from last week to make yourself look more awkward than you actually were. You are not remembering the original event. You are remembering the last time you remembered it. It is a degradation of signal. By the time you look at it today, the image is distorted, grainy, noise static. Yet you treat this fiction as gospel. You base your entire self-worth on a story that is largely edited and corrupted. You are agonizing over a tone of voice or a look on someone's face that you likely invented in the last 5 years of nocturnal reconstruction. Why does the brain engage in this self-sabotage? Why do we edit our own history to be perpetually worse than it was? Because of the unfinished task. Trauma, regret, and failure are open loops that the psyche desperately seeks to close. The brain hates open loops. It wants resolution. It wants to fix the ending, so it replays the scene. It says, let's run the simulation again. Maybe this time we can figure out what we did wrong. Maybe this time we can win the argument. You lie in bed shadowboxing, trying to win a battle that ended a decade ago. You are trying to achieve closure through pure intellect, but you cannot because the context is gone, and the version of you that existed then is dead. You must understand the profound arrogance of this process. You think that if you just analyze it hard enough, you can solve the past. You believe your intellect is a time machine. It is not. Thinking about a fire does not extinguish it. Analyzing the ashes does not rebuild the house. But the complex loves the analysis because it feels like action. Rumination is the mind's tragic attempt at magical thinking, feeling productive while remaining paralyzed. It convinces you that by worrying, you are working on it. You are not. You are only wearing a groove in the floor of your cell, pacing back and forth, digging the trench deeper. Now we move beyond the psychological into the biological architecture. This is the mechanism that makes you feel physically ill when you attempt to change. You are not merely addicted to the thoughts of the past. You are profoundly addicted to the feeling of the past. Every repetitive thought produces a chemical reaction in the brain. If you think a sad thought, your brain releases neuropeptides that make your body feel sad. If you think an anxious thought, you get a hit of cortisol and adrenaline. If you have spent the last 10 years feeling rejected, unworthy, or perpetually wronged, you have chemically conditioned your body to expect and demand that specific signature. Your biology requires the chemical signature of regret, as a predator requires blood. It is an internal dependency. This dependency is precisely where the psyche arrests itself. The body learns to demand the signature of certain hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, the bitter taste of shame, and the mind, which is merely the architect of the story, must continuously generate the necessary narrative to justify and sustain that chemical state. The ego, that fragile center of consciousness, has a profound investment in this state of affairs. We must understand the ego not as the self, but as the arbiter of limits. It is the curator of your known world. When you identify solely with the neurotic structure, the story of failure, the betrayal, the humiliation, you are creating a persona built entirely on suffering. This is the mask you wear, not for society alone, but for your own internal security. To be the victim, the wronged, the one who failed, is to occupy a role that is defined, predictable, and therefore safe. It is a terrible form of stability, a psychic equilibrium achieved through self-immolation. When you attempt to abandon this identity, when you try to step into the future and become the confident, integrated figure, the system experiences a catastrophic threat. The ego screams that the persona is dissolving. Who are you if you are not the one who survived that specific trauma? If you release the memory, you sacrifice the identity built upon it. This is the terror of the blank slate. The instinctual part of the archaic man within us is terrified of potentiality, because potentiality is chaos. The past, however wretched, is defined order. The future is the abyss, and the ego, preferring the known architecture of the prison cell, retreats, pulling the entire psychic apparatus back into the familiar, agonizing loop. The past, then, is not merely recalled, it is constantly fabricated. Memory is not a retrieval mechanism. It is an act of creation performed in the present moment. You are not pulling a pristine file from storage. You are the architect of ruins, reconstructing the scene based on your current emotional state. Every time you revisit that conversation, that decision, that moment of shame, you are not reviewing the truth. You are reviewing the last time you edited the script. This process results in a profound degradation of signal. What you believe to be the factual record is now distorted, overlaid with layers of psychic static, anxiety, and projected fear. Why does the psyche edit its own history to be worse than it was? Because the ego demands significance. It prefers to be the protagonist in a high tragedy than a mere background figure in a mundane reality. The memory of a small mistake is inflated into a colossal blunder. The minor slight is rewritten as profound betrayal. This high-stakes drama justifies the intensity of your present chemical addiction, the rush of cortisol, the spike of self-pity. If the past was merely mediocre, your current suffering would seem absurd. Therefore, the past must be monumental in its horror to validate the neurosis. This is the psychological machinery of the complex. It is the autonomous cluster of unconscious contents, energized by the trauma, which acts independently of the ego's will. The complex does not want resolution. It wants repetition. It wants to maintain its energetic charge. The rumination loop, the ceaseless analysis of what went wrong, is the complex's primary defense mechanism against true growth. By focusing your intellect solely on the dead past, the complex ensures you are perpetually distracted from the living problem, the necessity of integrating your shadow. The shadow is the hidden dark side of the personality, the unlived life, the courage you suppressed, the aggression you internalized, the potential you refused to claim. It is the true opponent that resides within. Confronting the shadow demands real action, ethical reckoning, and the pain of psychological sacrifice. It requires you to risk the future. The complex offers a substitute conflict, the ghost war. Instead of wrestling with the living internal opponent, you lie in the dark, shadow boxing against an externalized phantom of 5 years ago. You are fighting the ghost of the other person, the bad decision, the lost opportunity. This intellectual masturbation feels like struggle, but it is merely paralysis disguised as effort. It allows the ego to feel morally superior. I am working on myself. I am analyzing this, while simultaneously avoiding the terrible numinous encounter with the self. If you were to stop running the simulation, if you were to cease the frantic analysis, the energy locked in that complex would be released. That energy would immediately demand to be invested in the present moment, forcing you to face the actual structural flaws in your life, the cowardice, the avoidance, the refusal to take responsibility for your own destiny. The past loop is a substitute for individuation. It is the psychic mechanism by which we sacrifice the potential future self upon the altar of the known, painful ego structure. We choose to remain the wounded child rather than risk becoming the terrifying adult. This is not mere weakness. It is a profound, albeit tragic, loyalty to the familiar architecture of suffering. You must recognize that your attachment to the past is not love or regret. It is a calculated defense against the terrifying freedom of becoming whole. The ego, in its stubborn refusal to acknowledge the sovereignty of the unconscious, attempts to treat the traumatic memory as a fixed historical event, a ledger that simply needs balancing. But the psyche operates outside of linear time. The recurring scene, the silent film on the interior wall, is not history. It is a current symbol. It is a persistent motif, an imago actively demanding integration in the present moment. The memory of the past is merely the vessel through which the unconscious delivers a contemporary message regarding the structural weakness of the ego. When you analyze the precise wording of that ancient conversation, or the exact gesture of the person who betrayed you, you are engaging in a meticulously localized reading of a universal text. You are focused on the surface grammar while ignoring the deep symbolism. This memory is a cipher for the unlived life, a representation of the courage you failed to mobilize or the truth you refused to speak, which now requires expression through your current actions. The ghost you are fighting is not the person who abandoned you. It is the abandoned self, using the most dramatic language available, the language of pain, to force your attention inward. If the memory is a message from the depths, what terrible truth about your present existence is it forcing you to conceal behind the convenient mask of old suffering? Furthermore, the figures within this psychological theater are rarely themselves. The individual you wrestle with in the dark has been hollowed out and filled with your own internal material. The critical voice you hear is no longer the voice of the parent or the lover. It is the internalized animus, or the punitive aspect of the shadow, projected onto a convenient external phantom. The scene is not a factual recollection. It is a current canvas upon which the ego projects its unresolved complexes, granting them temporary external life. The purity of the original event has suffered severe signal degradation. Every time the memory is accessed, it is not simply retrieved. It is reconstructed and edited to conform to the current emotional climate. If you are steeped in guilt today, the memory will be subtly darkened, the perceived betrayal amplified, and your own awkwardness magnified. You are studying noise static, a highly processed, low-fidelity recording of an event that has been altered countless times by your own internal biases. Yet, you treat this distorted image as the foundational stone of your current personality, a monument built on psychological fallacy. Does your endless analysis of the past event, this frantic intellectual pacing, serve any purpose other than to create the illusion of control over a reality that is fundamentally chaotic and numinous? We must now descend beyond the ego's intellectual defenses and into the crude necessity of the body. You are not merely addicted to the narrative of the past. You are addicted to the specific chemical signature the narrative generates. Every time you successfully generate the feeling of shame, regret, or victimization, the brain releases a specific cocktail of neuropeptides, cortisol, and adrenaline. Your nervous system, highly specialized through years of repetition, demands this familiar neurochemical environment. Your existence has become pathologically defined by this internal chemistry. Your biology exhibits a predatory requirement for that signature output, just as a predator requires blood. The memory is merely the triggering mechanism, the cue that signals the body to initiate the familiar, painful metabolic process. The brain is not seeking historical truth, it is seeking homeostatic certainty. The certainty of suffering is preferable to the chemical terror of the unknown. The cost of this addiction is the sacrifice of the present self. By sustaining the neurochemical environment of the wounded past, you prevent the emergence of new, vital neural pathways that correspond to confidence, initiative, and integration. You are choosing to maintain a familiar, toxic equilibrium. If you knew, with absolute scientific certainty, that every hour spent replaying the past is an hour where you actively sacrifice a viable future version of yourself, would you still insist on maintaining this neurosis? The work of individuation requires the ego to recognize that the past is not a problem to be solved, but a symbol to be transcended. You cannot analyze your way out of the cell. You must enact the escape. The only way to dissolve the complex is to redirect the enormous psychic energy currently locked in rumination toward the creation of a future that is so compelling, so terrifyingly uncertain, that the brain is forced to abandon the anchor of familiar pain. You must cease to be the passive spectator of your own memory and become the active, responsible author of your own destiny. We must now move beyond the chemistry of habit into the true realm of the psychic reality. The neurosis you experience, this agonizing compulsion to replay the scenes of failure, is not merely a faulty mechanism of memory. It is the signature of a deeper psychic architecture, the autonomous complex. The complex is not a thought. It is a cluster of emotionally charged ideas that behaves like a miniature, independent personality. When you lie awake at night, gripped by the phantom shame of 5 years past, it is not you who is doing the thinking. It is the complex that has seized control of the ego's apparatus. It is an autonomous fragment of the psychic splinter that has grown roots and demands to feed. This is the meaning of psychological possession. The individual feels split. They observe their own mind running the same corrosive program and cry out, "I know this is irrational, yet I cannot stop." This internal conflict signifies the ego's temporary dethronement. The complex, perhaps the wounded child, the failed lover, or the betrayed innocent, has taken the sovereign seat, compelling the entire organism to follow its logic, which is the logic of historical pain. The complex is ruthless because it is blind. It does not possess consciousness or moral judgment. It only possesses energy. It is a dissociated piece of the self, cast off due to some unbearable shock or ethical conflict, and now it returns, hungry for life. It hijacks your attention, your hormones, and your narrative, forcing the present moment to conform to the template of the old wound. Consider the ancient stories of the soul being stolen by spirits, or the mythological figures who are cursed to repeat their errors in an eternal loop. These are not mere superstitions. They are accurate symbolic representations of the psychic reality of the autonomous complex. The man who perpetually sabotages his success because he fears the judgment of his long-dead father is not making a rational choice. He is being ridden by the father complex. His will is superseded. He is an instrument in the complex's dramatic reenactment. When the complex is active, you are not living your life, you are living its life. You become the stage upon which a drama that should have ended decades ago is endlessly rehearsed. This is why the emotional reaction is so disproportionate to the current stimulus. Your boss criticizes a report, and you collapse into the shame felt when you were 6 years old, failing to meet the impossible standards of the mother. It is the complex projecting its own history onto the blank screen of the present. The complex seeks not resolution, but repetition. It is trapped in the time before the trauma was integrated, desperately trying to force the ego back into that specific emotional landscape. It demands the familiar environment of cortisol and self-reproach, because that is the only language it speaks. To reclaim the soul, one must first recognize the possessor. You must cease the childish illusion that you are the one choosing the miserable thought. You must identify the voice in the dark as an intruder, a psychological entity that operates under its own laws, independent of your conscious will. The process of individuation demands that we confront these fragments in the shadow. If the ego refuses to integrate the pain does not vanish. It merely gains autonomy and becomes a demon. When you refuse to acknowledge the darkness within, the darkness stands outside the door and begins to dictate the terms of your existence. The vast majority of human suffering is not caused by external events, but by the civil war taking place inside the psyche, the battle between the conscious ego and these autonomous complexes. The individual is exhausted not because life is hard, but because they are constantly fighting an invisible enemy that wears their own face. How does one break the power of such an entity? Not by analysis alone. Analysis is the flashlight. It reveals the demon, but it does not dispel it. The complex thrives on intellectual rumination, because rumination is passive. It keeps the ego paralyzed and focused inward, exactly where the complex can maintain its dominance. The complex is dissolved through the enactment of the opposite. If the complex demands certainty and retreat, the ego must choose terrifying uncertainty and advance. If the complex demands the chemical signature of shame, the ego must generate the physical reality of competent action, even if it feels like a violation of the body's established chemistry. You must stop treating the complex as a problem to be solved with logic, and start treating it as a rival power that must be starved of its energy source. Its energy source is your focused attention and the subsequent chemical response. Every time you consciously redirect your psychic energy away from the loop of regret and toward a constructive present-day challenge, you are actively withdrawing sustenance from the complex. This is not a gentle process of letting go. This is psychic warfare. It requires an aggressive assertion of the self against the fragments of the past. It demands that you sacrifice the comfort of the familiar hell, the known prison, for the brutal, exposed terrain of genuine freedom. You must accept that the most dangerous thing you can do is to be fully present, fully responsible, and fully exposed to the future. That is the terrain where the complex dies, because there is no historical precedent for the complex to operate there. Its power is derived entirely from what has already been. The moment you step into what might be, the ghost loses its anchor. The question is simple. Do you continue to serve the ancient wound, or do you reclaim the sovereignty of your own soul? The choice is made every time the memory loop begins. Do you watch the film on the ceiling, or do you turn on the light and walk out of the room? The neurosis of repetition is not a simple malfunction. It is a profound psychic strategy. It serves the child within, the puer aeternus, who demands exemption from the existential gravity of choice. This refusal to bear the weight of the self is precisely the infantile neurosis. The past is not merely a memory, it is a cradle, a dark, uncomfortable cradle perhaps, but one where the ego is not held accountable for the present moment. The pain is familiar, and familiarity to the primitive mind equates to security. The complex, therefore, is not trying to hurt you, it is trying to keep you small. It is the protective mechanism of the parental home, long after the structure has become a ruin. You must understand that the suffering you cling to is a form of identity. It is the only definition of self that the dependent, infantile psyche recognizes. If you cease being the victim of the betrayal or the casualty of the failure, who are you then? You become undefined. And the indefinite future, the unconditioned possibility of the self, is 1,000 times more terrifying to the dependent ego than the most gruesome history. To step out of the neurosis, you must perform an act of psychic violence. This is the moment of sacrifice. You are not sacrificing your pain, you are sacrificing your identity as the wounded one. Your history, however agonizing, became your shield, the justification for your current paralysis. The complex is the voice that whispers, "You cannot act because of what happened then. You are exempt from effort because you have already suffered enough." This victim narrative must be burned on the altar of the future. The moment you choose to be the agent of your own life, you declare the death of the child who was reliant on external circumstances for definition. The adult task is terrifying because it means accepting full responsibility for the psychic reality you inhabit, irrespective of external causes. The child asks, "Who hurt me?" The adult asks, "What must I build now?" The burden of the self is the acceptance of freedom, and freedom is always accompanied by the anxiety of the abyss. The moment the ego accepts this burden, the symptoms of regression, the endless loops of regret, begin to lose their authority. They become irrelevant noise because the engine of the psyche is finally oriented toward the process of becoming the self. The power of the past is proportional to your refusal to live in the present. When you commit to action, not analysis, but action, you force the psychic energy that was bound up in the complex to flow forward. The energy that was being used to fuel the guilt loop becomes the fuel for your present competence. This redirection is not gentle, it is aggressive. It requires a conscious, daily assertion of will against the gravitational pull of yesterday. You must stop fighting the ghost and start building the future. The goal is not amnesia. We do not erase the past, we integrate it. Integration means acknowledging the shadow elements, the failures, the shames, as raw material, not as chains. The memory loop is a broken compass pointing backward. The true north is the realization that the wound is also the source of power. The energy locked in the complex must be liberated and repurposed for the construction of the conscious personality. This is the definition of psychic maturity, turning the lead of suffering into the gold of wisdom. You are not required to forget the event. You are required to change the relationship you have with the event. The memory must transition from an anchor that moors you to the seabed of regret to a scar, a visible sign that the survival strategy worked and that the terrain has been mapped. A scar is history, a wound is present. The choice is not between happiness and misery. The choice is between remaining a historical artifact, trapped in the repeating simulation of failure, or assuming the full, terrifying weight of your own being. The latter is difficult, isolating, and uncertain. It is the path of individuation, but it is the only path that leads to the sovereign soul. The price of this freedom is the permanent sacrifice of your excuses. You must surrender the comfort of the familiar sickness. The self-torture must cease the moment you realize that the pain is no longer a punishment, but a habit. And habits, however deep the groove they have worn, can be broken by the disciplined application of conscious will. Break the pattern, now. If the pain is a habit, then the cure is the formation of a counter-habit, the disciplined confrontation with the hidden architecture of the psyche. The ego, that small, frightened captain of your conscious island, believes it is solving the problem through endless analysis. It circles the ruin, measuring the dimensions of the collapse, hoping that intellectual mapping will somehow rebuild the structure. It will not. The intellect is an inadequate tool for this task, primarily because the complex, the autonomous fragment of the psyche that holds your shame and regret, does not respond to logic. It responds only to the numinous, to the symbolic, and to the immediate assertion of the self. The neurosis is not a sign of failure. It is a signal that your original life container has become too small. It is the psychic pressure exerted by the self, demanding a greater field of expression. The old identity, the one chained to the trauma of 5 years ago, must be sacrificed so that the new, integrated personality can emerge. This is the brutal alchemy of individuation. We speak of integration. What does this truly mean in the context of the repeating memory loop? It means recognizing that the figures who haunt your private theater, the critical authority, the betraying lover, the rejecting peer, are no longer external entities. They are now complexes within your own internal landscape. They are projections. You carry the ghost of the critical father and project his face onto every superior. You carry the abandoned child and overlay that image onto every romantic interaction. The world is not rejecting you today. Your psychic reality is simply holding up a mirror to the rejection you have refused to integrate internally. The key to unlocking the prison door is not to banish these figures, but to retrieve them. When you feel the familiar spike of shame or the visceral recoil of anticipated rejection, you must stop the outward gaze. You must ask, which part of my own shadow is being carried by this external figure? If you feel judged, where is the internal judge that is infinitely harsher than the one standing before you? The moment you reclaim the projection, the moment you recognize the external enemy as an internal complex, the energy bound up in that loop is released. The figure loses its power over you because you have dissolved its carrier. This is the labor of the self, to accept the totality of your being, including the part that failed, the part that was weak, and the part that was humiliated. Most people prefer the simplicity of moral judgment. I am good, they are bad, or the comfort of perpetual victimhood. I was broken by the event. But true psychic health requires the integration of the opposites. You must become the arbiter of your own psychic reality, accepting that you are both the victim and the perpetrator, the failure and the potential hero. You are terrified of the unknown future, yes, but you are also terrified of the unknown self. If you discard the story of the past, you discard your primary definition. The ego is built upon history. To step into individuation is to step into the terrifying domain of authentic being, where you are defined not by what happened to you, but by the conscious choices you make, moment by moment, against the collective tide. It means becoming the exception, the individual standing against the overwhelming pull of the mass man, who prefers collective delusion and shared neurosis to the solitude of self-knowledge. The path of individuation is not paved with affirmations or superficial adjustments. It is a descent into the abyss, a methodical mapping of the darkness that you have spent your entire life avoiding. It is the confrontation with the shadow, which is not merely the repository of your worst traits, but also the vault containing your unlived life, the courage, the instinct, and the power you suppressed out of fear or social conditioning. To break the addiction to the past, you must stop treating the memory as a historical fact and start treating it as a symbolic problem demanding integration. The purpose of the recurring dream, the obsessive thought, is not to punish you, but to compel you toward consciousness. It is the unconscious mind attempting to communicate a truth that the ego refuses to hear. You must accept the fact that your intellect cannot solve the problem of the soul. The solution lies in creating a new history through present disciplined action. We must cease the endless analysis of the ash heap and begin the construction of the conscious life. The psychic energy is finite. Every joule of energy spent reenacting the old shame is a jewel stolen from the possibility of building the new self. The time for philosophical meandering is over. This work is difficult, dense, and demands a relentless honesty that borders on masochism. It is not a temporary adjustment. It is a permanent commitment to the dialogue with the unconscious. If you are prepared to leave the safety of the known hell, if you are prepared to sacrifice the comfort of your excuses and face the terrifying freedom of the sovereign self, then the true work begins now. The journey into the psyche is the only remaining adventure worth undertaking in the modern world. It is the only way to avoid dissolving into the collective noise. This requires a dedicated discipline, a constant return to the primary texts of the soul, your dreams, your complexes, your symptoms. If the mapping of this territory, the architecture of the deep mind, is a subject you require assistance navigating, then I advise you to commit to the systematic study of this material. The choice is always the same: remain a prisoner of history or become the architect of your destiny. Choose wisely. The soul is waiting.